Yeah. Yes, it is a Model T Ford at a tank museum. And from the Stridswagen M21, you can see we're at a Swedish Tank Museum with a nice little collection of old things right at the entrance. I do believe this is my first ever NC27 by Renault. And if you look at it from the front, other than the tracks, I mean, it's a Renault FT, just slightly different suspension system, slightly longer engine compartment. What we have here is a 1917 4x4 truck. A nice little model of a Mark I. This is the Arsenalen Tank Museum. It's about 45 minutes to an hour outside of Stockholm. Why are we here? Well, as you are aware, the Swedish line is coming out and will the tank soon. So we're doing a little bit of background. The wheel cum track system on the M31 here. Of course, back in the day, logistics were terrible. Tanks would break down, and they were coming up with all sorts of creative ideas to keep the mileage and the wear down on the tracks. The Bovington Museum in the UK has quite a reasonable selection of these things. Not 31s, obviously, but the concept. They do have a couple of odd German vehicles here, so we got ourselves a Panzer I. And, what is it, like T-37 or something? My memory fails me on a lot of these little Russian tanks. It is a 37, okay. And it's kind of interesting, you look at these vehicles, especially when you're used to modern ones, and you look at just how small and flimsy they are, and you realize these were actually high cutting-end technology at the time. The invisible tank, I guess he's waiting for. A battle bus. No idea what sort. The M38, modern design for its time. Now, something you'll notice as a trend for all the Swedish tanks is basically based off of the Skoda suspension. CKD. Skoda. Yeah, I think it's Skoda. Can't remember. Yes, I am not infallible by memory. But if you look at the wheels on this, look at the sprocket, look at the idler, you'll see it looks a heck of a lot like a 38T. And it's sort of a common trend between all the Swedish vehicles. It's almost like a branding corporate image that they liked the design and they kept using it. The solid rubber tires here kind of belie what looks like quite a modern armored car. L60, same again. It's actually, for a small tank, it's surprisingly roomy inside. I got inside the other day. Not sure how much you're going to see without this glare. I mean, I'm not going to say it was massively comfortable forever, but you know, you could sit in it. Moving on to the M42. Again, you see the big sprocket at the front, angle to the rear. This battle bus was known as the Coffin for some reason. Now, one of the fun things, you have a look at the visor. there's no way of seeing out when you've closed the visor, so I'm told all you have to do is just be very careful about how much you close it. Another vehicle based off of the 38T. So we had one of the lads with measuring tape the other day, and we were comparing the wheel sizes, and sure enough, all the wheel sizes for most of these things are for the original 38T, not the Jägerpanzer 38T, which had bigger wheels. This is old. Can't tell you what it is, but it is old. There is a Firefly here. The Swedes rather liked the Sherman when they tested it. They did try to buy them. For whatever reason, they weren't allowed to in the end, or weren't able to. Everybody's familiar with the footage of the testing of the mobility trials of Sherman versus the other vehicles. And if you actually look at the Swedish archive reports, they actually very much liked the Sherman, and that little video does not give the full effect. So this is a TNH, which is as near to a 38T as you're going to get. Slight Swedish modification. This is apparently a bit of a retrofit. It's not an original TNH. This is, however, an original Jägerpanzer. And they do have a G13 here at the museum. It's in back storage. Motorcycle, universal carrier, Kugelwagen, and a Marder 2, which was brought over for trials. Apparently it was in such terrible condition it could not actually be used for trials. So then they went around and they restored it as best they could just to put it into the museum. I'd say that they basically just mounted the pack gun complete with its original dual layer shield. So you can see there's actually two parts to that gun shield. The Arsenalen is a private operation effectively supported by the Swedish military. So all the vehicles are owned by the Swedish military, but they couldn't be arsed to actually operate the museum. So hence the private organization Arsenalen came along. This vehicle apparently used to be an open-topped vehicle with a mechanism whereby the gun would be retracted for traveling. Eventually they made it heavier, put a roof on it, and fixed the gun in place. You'll note that they've reinforced the lead pair of road wheels. Some books and manuals state that a similar reinforcement was used, or at least intended to be used, for the STRV-74s, but it looks like it never happened. Well, of course, Bofors is in Sweden, and they are famous for the 40mm gun, so I guess it's not surprising that they would have a vehicle, the FM43, with twin 40s on it. If you want a little bit of headroom in your vehicle, there's one for you, whatever kind of truck that is. They do, of course, have a Jeep. And so we enter the Cold War section with a Trabi. There's actually some metal in there, right? A very detailed dash. God, this thing's awful. Oh, anyway. The story about the back there is a story about the Swedish nuclear weapons program, which they abandoned in the 60s. The band canon. I wouldn't mind doing an inside the hatch on this guy. We're not going to, no. A combat tractor, apparently issued to the bicycle units. I'm not entirely sure why. STRV-74. And yet again, on this PB301, look at the wheels. And guess what? It's basically the TNH design. They made this one by basically just taking the running gear and the gearbox. Everything else got changed or rebuilt. What is the little vaguely there? It's got enough radio antennas, I'll give you that much. The museum is basically one big hall. A mono trailer. I have spoken and written about this many times. It's good to see one in the flesh, as it were. Hooked up to a Mark 10 of some sort. Of course, the Swedish call it an STRV 122 or something like that. But yeah, they had fun setting that one up. Should be a 91. Yes, my memory has not failed me. The engine compartment in this, if you look at it, when it's lifted up, the engine is at a bit of an odd angle. In order to keep it shorter, it's sort of angled at about 30 degrees off of the center line. And that makes sense until you realize that then you have an issue getting the power to rotate the 30 degrees to go into the drive wheels at the rear. I mean, it's simple enough mechanics, but you know, just one extra additional problem to worry about. I suspect there's a couple of bits and pieces missing on this one. I don't think you're supposed to be able to see the engine like that. Initially I thought it was a Pinsker. Apparently it's not. It's just a local development vehicle. Stalwart. I have to say that has got to be still the most fun vehicle I have ever driven. If you ever get one of these things off-road on a bit of a wet surface, it slides around. The steering wheel, it's not even power assist, it's full power steering, so you start the wheel spinning and it keeps spinning on its own until you grab it. I had so much fun driving that thing. Centurion, again, upgraded, additional armor, same stowage box, very identifiable, and yes, they have a chieftain. Yay! T-72. Now, I think the first cut-in-half vehicle really was the Centurion, but there's actually quite a few vehicles that have been cut in half or taken apart for training purposes, whatever. So if you want to see the inside of one of these T-Series vehicles, 54, 55, look for the NBC at the front. Of course, they've taken off where the NBC mount would be, they've removed it, so I can't tell you offhand if it's a 54 55, but given the horseshoe armor and laser rangefinder, I'm going to go with the T55 AM2. Just says T55 on the label. Note that they've mounted the snorkel. You don't see the snorkel added very often in musea. And 1151. In, I should say, excellent condition. Still have the wrapping on the chairs. Unfortunately, they've locked it, so I haven't been able to sneak in. Ferret, and apparently they used greyhounds for a while. This is apparently the closest modern tank to Stockholm. It is still an active service tank that's just basically on loan to the museum while they're not using it for a while. And just in case something happens, they still have a trickle charger going to the battery, so they can just fire it up and go away. I presume it's not loaded. You never know in Sweden, though. They've always had an interesting defense policy. Going around, another coffin, except this is the improved version with a roof. This was at one point an IKV 103, I think, or something like that. It is now being converted into an anti-aircraft missile vehicle by use of an RBS-70. The RBS series was a little bit weird in this case. Well, the RBS-70, it was something, if I recall, a laser homing missile. You actually had to paint the target. Of course, the advantage to this was you didn't have any radar emissions to worry about, and flares would be completely ineffective. The disadvantage is you got to track a fast-moving aircraft. Now, this is apparently a trainer for coastal fortifications. So, of course, the Swedes, whenever they were done with the tank, they take the turret and turn it into a fortification at the coast or airfields and so on. So they tow this around for training. It's a little bit unusual. This is an A2, so it's still got the petrol engine, and it should still have the sticks for controlling. And if you look at the tracks of the 113, the tracks and sprocket wheel, and then look at the tracks and sprocket wheel of this 302 here, you see that the Swedes rather liked the suspension. And they updated the tracks a little later. Of course, you can't have a Swedish museum and not have an S-tank. And what looks suspicious is like an MTLB. Not entirely sure where they got that one from. Anyway, that's pretty much the Swedish Museum.